Welcome to the Thoughts and Bolts show. This is Pedro Lavaria, your host, and we are going to talk about CIA psyops and the UFO phenomenon. Specifically, what I call the anatomy of a psychological operation designed to engineer disbelief in the UFO phenomenon. Now, you may ask, why would anyone want us to not believe UFOs are real? Why would the CIA or other alphabet agencies do this? And the first rule of responsible conspiracy theory is to not posit a conspiracy theory of the kind which has not happened before. So if you don't think that our alphabet agencies, intelligence community, whatever want to manipulate us through the use of media, I suggest you look at Operation Mockingbird and the Twitter files. Okay. So do your own research, look up Operation Mockingbird, look up the Twitter files. As you know, Twitter and Facebook were pressured by the FBI to suppress the Hunter Biden laptop story, which was going to be the big October surprise in the 2020 election. As the FBI commanded these social media companies to suppress the story, 50 former intelligence experts went on the record to say that the Hunter Biden laptop had all the makings of a Russian disinformation operation. And of course, it was not true, right? It was not true. The Hunter Biden laptop was real, it was authentic, and it was the big October surprise. And it got spoiled by suppression on social media, which was directed by the FBI. And of course, these members of the intelligence community going on the record and saying, it's not real, it's not real. I mean, you had former directors of the CIA who were saying it wasn't real. They lied, right? So right there, I just established the precedent, right? We have been lied to before. We have been manipulated by our alphabet agencies, the intelligence community, to believe things which aren't true. Now, the motive with regards to UFOs. If you go on CIA FOIA, you can find this great document. It used to be secret. It was a report on a meeting for the scientific advisory panel on UFOs for the CIA, and basically what they concurred was that the UFO sightings themselves did not pose a threat to national security. So flying saucers are not dangerous. However, there was an indirect threat. And that was a threefold threat. First, it was the danger that comes from misidentification of actual enemy artifacts. So you don't want somebody in charge of defending the country to misidentify a nuclear warhead from the Soviets with a UFO, right? You don't want that to happen, right? So you wanted to dissuade people from believing UFOs were real, flying saucers were real, because you wanted the people who are in charge of protecting the country to focus on real threats like intercontinental ballistic missiles, fighter jets, bomber jets, spy balloons, that sort of thing. The other thing they were worried about is overloading of emergency reporting channels. Again, you don't want to overload those emergency reporting channels with sightings of UFOs. You want them to be freed up for real emergencies. Like I said, ICBMs, fighter jets, spy balloons. And the third part was they were afraid of mass hysteria and the public having a greater vulnerability to possible psyops from the Soviets. So you can imagine perhaps a fake landing of a UFO used to masquerade a bomb, or just being used by the Soviets to freak everybody out. And again, mass hysteria. They just didn't believe we could handle the truth. So they proposed an education program which had two parts to it, a training part and a debunking part. The training part focused on training the public to identify prosaic things in the sky for what they are, right? Balloons, aircraft, meteors, fireballs, certain kinds of clouds, the planet Venus, whatever. Anyone who knows anything about the UFO subject will tell you that 95% of alleged UFO sightings are actually just prosaic things like the planet Venus or airplanes or balloons. This is ufology 101. Okay, there's nothing new here. There, however, are those 5% of cases for which we have tons of data, but which we cannot identify. Okay, that is a UFO. So the first part of this plan looks pretty innocuous, right? Train the public to identify things in the sky for what they really are, when they really are prosaic. But the second half of the plan was regarded debunking. They wanted to create a reduction in public interest in flying saucers because this the flying saucer has a strong psychological impact on the public, right? So they wanted the people to be less interested in it. And how would they do that? By using mass media, television, motion pictures, magazine articles. And they wanted to focus on cases that looked really good, but which were actually prosaic, right? So you show the mysterious UFO case and you show that it's really a weather balloon or it's really Venus or it's really just a jet or a Chinese lantern, whatever it is. And in so doing that, people become less interested in the subject. They likened it to showing how a magic trick works, right? If someone does a cool magic trick, it looks really impressive. You want to see it again. But once you know how the magic trick is done, you don't want to see it again. And so that's what they wanted to condition people to think about the UFO subject. They were even thinking of using the Walt Disney Company to do this and to make these little documentaries and show them at business clubs, high schools, colleges, normal television stations, all with the intent of, again, dissuading the public from believing in UFOs, from acknowledging that UFOs are real, that there is a non-human technological presence on this planet. Now, before I go even further, I want to give you a brief little psychology class, specifically the cognitive conditioning pioneered by Ivan Pavlov. It's very simple. You have an unconditioned stimulus, unconditioned response, right? This unconditioned stimulus in this case is a bowl of meat. You put it in front of the dog's face. The dog salivates, right? He doesn't even choose to salivate. It's just a reflex. But then you have a neutral stimulus. Neutral stimulus is anything that doesn't elicit a response, right? So in this case, a bell, right? The dog hears the bell, doesn't react to it. But if you combine the bell with the bowl of meat and put it in front of the dog while you ring the bell, naturally the dog's going to salivate, not because of the bell, but because of the meat. However, if you do this over and over and over again enough times, the dog will begin to salivate just from hearing the bell. Why? Because when you combine the bell with the meat, suddenly the bell is associated with the meat. In some sense, in a subconscious level for the animal, the bell is the meat. And so it elicits the same response. And this is important to understand as we go forward. What I'm going to argue is that the National Enquirer and the Weekly World News were part of a CIA psychological operation to make the UFO subject ridiculous, right? To condition the public in such a way so as to dissuade interest in the subject and to make it something worthy of ridicule, to make it something that no one in polite society would ever talk about, to make it something that people think is crazy, to the extent that even if they saw a UFO for themselves, they would second guess themselves and definitely not share the story with anybody else for fear of ridicule. Now, my three sources for this, actually I have four sources, but these are the three big ones. One is a book by Paul David Pope called The Deeds of My Fathers. He is the son of Generoso Pope Jr. and Generoso Pope's grandson of Generoso Pope Sr. Another one is The Godfather of Tabloid, which was published by University of Kentucky Press. And the third source is 60 Minutes episode, which you can find on YouTube, which was very enlightening. I did not know that at the time of this show being aired, that in 1984, the National Enquirer was the biggest publication in the United States. They had outsold Time magazine. They had outsold the New York Times. They were the show. They made all their money from over-the-counter sales. They didn't even advertise in their own paper because they were making so much money they didn't need to. Um, Now, it all starts with Gene Pope, Generoso Pope Jr. He was a smart kid. He graduated from MIT and he became the editor of Il Progresso. Il Progresso was his father's Italian language newspaper in the United States. You have to remember that during the LSL Island times, a lot of Italians came to the United States, and they were up in the northern East Coast. And as late as 1946, there were still Italian Americans that spoke Italian. So Il Progresso was their Italian language newspaper. You can kind of compare it to their version of Telemundo, right? It was their thing. Now he was the editor for 4 years because again, it was his father's newspaper, right? So he's an MIT grad, really smart, and at a very young age, he gained experience as being a newspaper editor. In 1947, the Roswell event happened, which we'll return to shortly because that is a big part of this story. Now, 1947, Roswell happens. 1951, Gene Pope works for the CIA in psychological warfare for less than a year. That's right. He was working in the CIA as a psychological warfare man for less than a year. Now, what happens next? 1952, in March, you have the beginning of Project Blue Book. Project Blue Book was the Air Force's forward facing in UFO investigation, right? This was them telling the public, look, we're looking into the flying saucers. We're going to do our due diligence and we'll tell you what we find. And as we know, that really isn't exactly how it happened, right? They showed us some things, but not all things. And many of the things they showed us, they concluded were nothing spectacular. So you have in March 1952 the beginnings of Project Blue Book, and literally in April of 1952, Gene Pope buys the National Enquirer. The first issue with him as editor comes out in April 7th, right? So Gene Pope gets out of the CIA. He only worked there for a year in psychological warfare, right? Then he buys the National Enquirer. At this, within a month of the beginning of Project Blue Book, which is again the Air Force's forward-facing UFO investigation. Now, it's important to note that there were many accusations that Gene Pope actually bought the National Enquirer with mafia money, that the mob, the Italian mafia, actually financed the purchase. This claim is actually um, discussed in all three of these sources. And so I'm not saying that's what happened, but if this is a CIA psychological operation, it would make sense to fund it with illicit funds. That way, it's not on any kind of government record, right? So that if anyone in the future were ever try to investigate and see, hey, is the CIA psyoping the American public through its own periodicals? It won't show up. There won't be any record of it because again, illicit funding is being used to finance the operation. Now, let's look at the National Enquirer and how this works. Remember the psychology class I gave you at the very beginning of this thing. Okay, look at this. Pentagon lies to America about UFOs. That's true. Lyle Menendez and Eric Menendez going free. Not true. Okay. Fly Kate traps Mean Megan. All this mean girl high school drama is being coupled with the UFO issue, with UFO secrecy issue, right? Along with this nonsense about Eric and Lyle Menendez. Then you look at this other issue to the right, dying queen's death decrees. Charles forced to retire. William wins the throne. Harry and Meghan banned. Obviously, this is nonsense, right? King Charles is the king of England as we speak. William isn't the king yet. And so, this is all nonsense. Look at Josh Duggar marked for death in prison, right? And right next to all this, what do they have? Air Force pilot tangles with 9 UFOs. Okay, something that actually happens, right? Air Force pilots having and Navy pilots having encounters with UFOs, and it's funny that one of the pictures they use here is an artist's rendition of the Calvine incident, which we now have a original picture of, and which is the best picture of a UFO ever made. So notice the coupling here, right? You're coupling tawdry gossip, this low IQ, low bandwidth type of news with something very serious and something very potentially impactful, which is the UFO phenomenon. Again, gay secrets of WWF legend took to the grave. Right next to it, America's new UFO based shocking reason Area 51 is closing, right? Again, you're coupling something kind of tawdry and again, gossipy rumor mill nonsense. It's low class, low brow, and you're coupling it with the UFO phenomena. Look at the next one. Will Smith gangster life exposed. There's nothing gangster about Will Smith, okay? And then right next to it, UFO invaders targeting the USA, why scout ship sightings are on the rise, and Congress warned at secret meetings. Now, Congress does, at least recently, has been briefed in secret meetings about the UFO phenomenon, okay? But Will Smith is not a gangster, right? All this Johnny Depp, Amber Heard stuff, again, more low IQ, low frequency gossip, very low brow thing. And so what they're doing is they are making the UFO something that is gossipy, low IQ, not for polite society, right? That they're putting these two things together. Now, I don't know about you, but I was raised in the 1980s and in the 90s because I was born 1980. And I remember the Weekly World News and the Inquirer were at every checkout stand right next to the conveyor belt. So you did not even have to buy these periodicals to see the cover, right? I always looked at the cover. I think I bought one issue of the Weekly World News when I was 10 years old, and that's it, right? But I always saw the cover, right? And I always saw the cover of the Inquirer, and they were always doing this, right? They're coupling the the serious, profound issue of the UFO phenomenon with the absolutely ridiculous, right? And what happens? We get conditioned to see the UFO phenomena as ridiculous. Why? Because when you couple the truth with the ridiculous, the truth becomes ridiculous. Okay, so let's continue. Now, something very interesting happened in the 1970s. Jesse Marcel Sr., who was one of the witnesses to the Roswell wreckage, he started talking to UFO investigators, Stanton Freeman and Leonard Stringfield, and he started telling them the truth that, well, they lied. What happened at Roswell, if you don't remember? Basically, they said a flying disc had crashed at Roswell, New Mexico, and that the remains were transferred to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. But then the Air Force changed its mind. And they said, no, it wasn't a flying disc. It was a weather balloon. And they had, Jesse Marcel come out and pose with the wreckage of a weather balloon, aluminum foil, and everyone had a good laugh. And it's like, okay, it wasn't a flying saucer, it was a weather balloon. But in the 1970s, now an old man and 30 years out of the military, Jesse Marcel started to come clean and he said, no, it was a flying disc and there was debris of an anomalous nature. He talked about a thin piece of metal that was very long, but they couldn't bend it even if they jumped on it or hit it with a sledgehammer. His son talked about pieces of the metal brought to his home where some of them had hieroglyphics, another piece of metal you could crumple up into a small ball, and then when you open your hand, it would just retain its original shape. Okay, so Jesse Marcel started talking in the 1970s, right? And guess what? In 1979, in October, you had the first issue of the Weekly World News. The following month, you have the documentary UFOs Are Real coming out with Jesse Marcel Sr. So Jesse Marcel Sr. made his theatrical debut in a documentary in November of 1979, where he told his story about the Roswell crash, and which was basically the truth, right? But 1 month before that, boom, you have the Weekly World News, right? So this is intentional, okay? And then 1 month after the UFOs Are Real documentary comes out, Bob Pratt interviews Jesse Marcel Sr. for the National Enquirer. Remember this? Yeah, they upped their game. Okay, they took it to the next level, right? Whereas the National Enquirer made the UFO phenomena something trashy and low IQ, the Weekly World News made it absolutely ridiculous and worthy of mockery, right? I was Bigfoot's love slave. Now I'm pregnant with this baby. And right above that, Alien endorses Donald Trump, right? And another issue, Alien in the slammer after fist fight with Bill over Hillary. And there you have Bill Clinton with a black eye that the alien supposedly gave him, right? So this is what they're doing. This is the game, right? Most people before the October 2017 Tic Tac story in the New York Times with the whole revelation about ATIP, the Pentagon program on UFOs, didn't read UFO books, didn't take it seriously, right? And so, for the vast majority of people, if you had any exposure to the UFO phenomenon, it was at the checkout stand with this kind of stuff, okay? And again, they're just treating you like dogs, making the UFO phenomena something worthy of ridicule. Okay. President Clinton rides in UFO. Hillary adopts alien baby. Okay. This is the game. This is how they up the level. Once the stakes got more serious, with finally people talking about what really happened at Roswell, they leveled up and they made the subject even more ridiculous. Okay. And so look, you have March 1952. Project Blue Book begins. 1 month later, boom, National Enquirer is purchased by Generoso Pope, right? And what do? They combine UFO stories with kind of like the sensational and kind of tawdry, lowbrow gossip, right? Making the UFO subject tawdry and lowbrow. But in October 1979, they start the Weekly World News, which just goes straight into mockery mode, right? Gay aliens found in UFO wreck, right next to I became a porn star to pay for my mom's facelift, right? All these stories are definitely fake in the Weekly World News, and they're meant to make you laugh at the UFO phenomenon. And right 1 month after the Weekly World News begins, you have the release of the UFOs Are Real documentary. So all of this was brought to you by Generoso Pope Jr. That's right, a CIA psychological warfare officer. This is not a coincidence, folks. Okay, this is not a coincidence. The timing and the perpetrator, it's not a coincidence. It's part of the CIA psyop. Now, people always ask if there really are crashed UFOs and dead aliens and those bodies and craft have been recovered and there are attempts by private industry to reverse engineer these things, how could you keep a secret like this for so long? Well, the answer is you can't keep a secret like this for so long, right? This is a secret which has been leaking at least once a decade ever since the 1970s, right? Jesse Marcel Sr. was the first. Then you had Bob Lazar in the 1980s, right? Nobody knew Area 51 existed until Bob Lazar told us it existed and that he had worked on a crashed UFO at the S-Force facility near Area 51, and that they were attempting to reverse engineer a non-human craft, right? Then you have Philip Corzo in the 1970s with his book, The Day After Roswell, where he talks about how some of the artifacts from the Roswell crash were given to him in order to give to private industry, right? So that they could reverse engineer it, right? Then you have Stephen Greer in the 2000s with the Disclosure Project, right? Where he brought a lot of different former military people, former government contractor people, to get them on the record in front of the National Press Club and having them tell the truth that look, government interest in the UFO subject did not end with Project Blue Book in the 1960s, but it's been an ongoing situation, an ongoing topic of interest. And some of them had dealt with the UFO phenomenon in in their capacity as military men and government contractors, right? And then, of course, in 2019, the Wilson Davis notes leak, right? J. Edgar Mitchell and Stephen Greer had an audience with Vice Admiral Tom Wilson, who is the director of national intelligence, and they told him, look, the director of, I'm sorry, Defense Intelligence Agency, he was the DIA director, right? Eventually. And they told him, look, here are these secret programs, here are the names, go look for them. Tom Wilson listened to them because of his tremendous respect for Ed Mitchell, one of the men who walked on the moon. And he found the program, he found the reverse engineering. UFO reverse engineering program, right? And they told them to step away, to get off their case, that he did not have a need to know, that the president didn't have a need to know, that Congress didn't have to need to know, and that if he pushed this any further, he was going to lose stars and he would be forced to retire early, right? And he did, right? And so he became the head of the DIA. And then he confided this to Eric W. Davis, who took copious notes. And you can read those notes off of congress.gov because in 2002, we had our first UFO hearings in Congress since the 1950s. And Eric W. Davis notes were added to the congressional record. by Congressman Mike Gallagher. If you don't know about this, it's because you haven't been paying attention, right? It's because you get your news from mainstream media only, and you don't pay attention to what's going on. But if you want to read the details of Tom Wilson's conversation with Eric Davis about the reverse engineering program that he discovered, UFO, non-human intelligence created craft reverse engineering program. You can read the details of those notes because they're part of the congressional record. They had actually leaked from the personal papers of Ed Mitchell when he died. One of his relatives put them on Imgur of all places, and they're totally legit. So go check it out. And of course, you have the 2023 UAP hearings where David Rush um, testified before Congress that when he was part of the UAPTF, his role was to find these programs, and he found them. He talked to 40 different people who worked on those programs, and he knows where the stuff is located and who's on the programs and what the programs were called. And he testified before Congress, but because he doesn't have his security clearances anymore, he couldn't testify in a secured compartmentalized information facility, a SCIF, and so he couldn't give Congress the details, right? Which is horrible, right? But they kept him out of a SCIF, so he couldn't do that, right? So, and then you have right next to him David Fravor, the pilot in the famous Nimitz encounter, and then Ryan Graves. So basically, this secret leaks all the time, right? Every 10 years, it seems to leak, and every decade, it seems to leak since the 1970s, right? But that doesn't matter, does it? Because there is an engineered giggle factor, right? We have all been treated like dogs into thinking that the UFO phenomenon is nonsense and that we shouldn't pay attention to it. This psyop has been happening right under our noses, but hopefully its power is weakening as the disclosure movement goes forward. So that's my little spiel for today. I hope you enjoyed it. And remember, we're all one, and this stuff isn't going away. So you have a good day and peace and party on.